Hello and welcome to Data Mining. My name is Fayaz Minhas and I will be your instructor for this particular module. Before moving on into the specifics of this lecture, let me give you a brief introduction to myself. It would have been great to be in a class live with you, but it is what it is. So this is me in front of, in my native environment, in front of the Department of Computer Science, where I work primarily in the development of machine learning and data science models to understand cancer, either using pathology images or as bioinformatics techniques. So that's what I like to do. And this particular module is my favorite in the sense that I get to teach what I do. So we are going to develop and machine learning models in this particular module, much like I do in my research. And the goal I have in mind is to enable students like you to develop novel solutions to machine learning problems and data science problems. So at the end of this particular module, what I would like you to be able to do is when you're given a machine learning problem or a data science problem, you'll know how to solve it and to develop a solution for a completely novel problem that you haven't previously worked on. Okay? But before moving there, we're going to, in this lecture, talk about what data mining actually is and what machine learning is. If you know about it, that's good, but you may want to hang in there and watch the series of questions that I ask to help you better understand data mining and machine learning. And not only in this lecture, but in other lectures, I would be asking questions. And what you can do is to pause the video after a question and reflect on the question and try to come up with an answer. And then you can resume the video where I would be giving out the answer to that question. So the first question I have is on your screen. You have paintings painted by two different artists. The top row is painted by Vincent van Gogh. The bottom row over there is painted by Salvador Dali. Please take a good look at these paintings. Okay, I hope that was sufficient time because now I'm going to ask a question. And the question simply is, who painted this? And I think this would be a very easy question for you to answer because this particular painting was part of our training set as it is already included in the top row so that it was painted by the painter in the top row who happens to be Vincent van Gogh. Okay, so you must have guessed it correctly. What about this one? Now, this is a bit hard because this particular painting is not a part of our training set. It's not in the top row, it's not in the bottom row. So what I would ask you to do is to reflect on the structure of this painting or the painting style in this painting, and then try to relate it to the paintings that we had seen earlier and to give an answer. And if you do that, though it would be very hard for you to describe possibly what you thought of why this particular painting was painted by a certain painter, most of you would have guessed correctly that this painting was painted by the painter in the bottom row, who happens to be Salvador Dali. And if you look back, the style of this, it's hard for me to describe as well. That the style of the painting that we saw on the next slide is actually, it matches the style of these paintings more than it does in the paintings in the top row, which happen to be more natural beauty or nature scenes, whereas the ones in the bottom, they are more abstract, much like what we see in this particular painting. This ability that humans have of trying to generalize, of being able to generalize, given some examples, to unknown or unseen cases is really interesting. So what we demonstrated here is an ability to learn from data and to be able to generalize to unseen cases or unseen examples and make correct predictions under those unseen circumstances. So this is what we can do. Another example, a very simple one again, is on your screen. Is you can see some apples and you can see some oranges, and the question is very simple: what is this? Now, Even if this is the first time you're seeing this particular picture on your screen, you would still be able to see or guess that this is an apple, although this is not a part of our training set. So this is pretty easy for us, right? Again, it shows or demonstrate our inherent ability to be able to generalize to unseen cases. Similarly, if I ask you the question about the figure that you see on your screen, I love apples, by the way. So the question is, how many different categories of apples do you see in this particular painting or in this particular picture? And you can come up with different answers depending upon how you define similarity. So some people say that there are four different colors, hence there are four different types of apples. Some people say that there are five circular patterns or the way these apples are arranged, hence there are five different categories, and both of those answers are correct. Here, what we are doing is we're looking at the data, in this case, the set of apples in front of us, and we are trying to understand it by grouping them together. Okay. If I asked you about this particular case, and I asked you the question, which one is the odd one out? You may want to pause the video and answer this question. It's very easy. In the left figure, you see that there's an apple that is red, that is very different from everything else, hence that is odd one out. But can you find other apples that are different? And if you can, there are. There are other definitions of being different or being odd. So please go ahead and take a look at those and try to identify those. In the figure on the right, which is typically used in IQ tests, you can again come up with different definitions of what is odd. Some people may say that because the second image has triangles in it, that is odd. Some people may say that third image is odd because both of the black half spheres are facing the same direction, whereas in other images they are facing in different directions. So there can be different definitions of oddness, and you can come up with different answers to these questions. Okay? The next question I have for you is pretty simple again. What is the next number in this series? And this is the Fibonacci series. That is, a current number is the sum of the previous two numbers. So probably the next number is going to be 21. So what you demonstrated here is again an ability to predict based on given data. Okay. Now this is a tricky question. On your screen are five vectors, x1 through x5. Each one of these has four numbers in it, or four different components or dimensions as we call them. And if you look at them at these four cases, the question I'm going to ask is, if we store all of these numbers, then we would need 20 different variables or 20 units of memory to store all of these numbers, 5 times 4. However, is it possible to reduce this number, the number of required variables that are required to store these numbers? So here's a hint. So if you take a look at this particular column, the last column, all of these values are 4. Okay, so since they're the same across all of these vectors, we don't need to probably save them for all of these vectors. So you can get rid of this particular dimension, the last dimension, and you can reduce the amount of memory you would need to store these variables. However, the question is, can you do better? And you may want to pause the video at this point and answer the question. Can we get rid of other variables? Can we reduce the amount of memory required to save these numbers further? And if you look closely, then the first and third column are exactly the same. So these two columns, they are exactly the same. So if you want to save some memory, you may just want to save the fact that the first column and the third column are the same, and then get rid of one of those columns, let's say the third one. So that would effectively reduce the amount of memory required to half, because you only need half of those numbers now. But you can even do better than that. If you look closely again, the first and the second column are actually multiples of one another. So the second column is two times the first column. And if you use that fact, then you probably don't need to store this second column as well. So you can reduce the amount of memory required further. What we've done in this particular example or in this question is that we have analyzed the data that was given to us, and we have tried to use that analysis or the patterns in the data to get a reduced representation of this data, or we've reduced the amount of memory required when we are storing these vectors. So this is called dimensionality reduction, and we are able to do that, although it was probably a bit tougher than the previous examples that we were given. Okay, we all know how to drive, and when we are learning to drive, or another example can be simply learning to write, we are actually taught by a teacher who encourages us when we do well in terms of the way they want us to proceed in terms of writing or in terms of driving. If you make a mistake, then you will probably hear about your mistake from drivers around you. So there is a feedback mechanism. If you do good driving, you get a benefit for that. If you do bad driving, you get some fines or some insults thrown at you from other drivers around you. So that enables us to be better drivers actually, if we don't get angry, okay, and engage in road rage or anything. So that gives us an ability to learn from our previous experiences. So learning from our own previous data. So this is called reinforcement learning, in which we are learned from reward signals, and we are able to utilize that to learn to do many things. Okay. So up till now, what we have talked about is a set of these different questions, and I'm going to talk about each one of these again. In the first few questions, we saw that we are able to determine whether a particular object was whether the painting was painted by the top row painter or the bottom row painter, and then the question was for an unseen painting that you had not seen in that particular first row or second row, you were able to infer correctly or generalize, as I would be calling it, for the rest of this module to an unseen case. In the other example, you were able to identify that a given object as an apple, though that particular apple, you probably had never seen that before. Okay, but again, you demonstrated an ability to generalize, and that is common. It can be difficult for depending upon what the problem is, but all human intelligence has an ability to be able to infer or make predictions for data that it has not seen before. How are you able to identify the different types of apples? We grouped different types of apples in the clustering example, and each one of us may come up with a different measure of similarity when grouping these different types of apples, but we were able to group them, right? And we were able to draw some meaningful inference. So we were able to identify different types of apples, right? So we can reduce the complexity of the data set, and we can understand it better by doing clustering. Similarly, you were able to predict what the next number in the series was, and in the Fibonacci series, and that is also our ability to predict, given certain data, what the next thing is going to be. Sometimes it can be hard, for example, for predicting stock prices, but sometimes we're able to do it really well. How were we able to identify which dimension was redundant when we are trying to reduce the amount of memory required to store those 4 or 5 vectors that we saw in the previous slide? We were able to analyze patterns in the data, and then we were able to use those patterns to reduce the amount of dimensionality or the amount of memory that is needed. Similarly, we discussed how we can spot odd ones out, things that don't fit the pattern with other examples that we are given. And we also talked about reinforcement learning, or learning to drive and learning to write, in which how we are able to identify how our behavior or learning behavior gets rewarded, and we can identify patterns in those rewards or in those reward signals in order to learn better. All of these examples have one thing in common. They enable you to perform over examples or over cases that you had not seen before. So that's a common theme. However, all of these cases have different names, and I'm going to give you give you that definition of those names. The first one is classification, in which we identify whether a particular example or an image is an apple or not, because we have classified it. That by it I mean that particular example or that particular image into one of the two classes, apple or orange. So that is why this is called classification. The same thing is true for the other case in which we identify who painted a particular painting. It was another classification example. The third one in which we clustered is unimaginatively called clustering or grouping of these examples, identifying what the next number in the series is going to be based on previous data. We can call it a very specific example of something called regression that is very useful, let's say, in predicting stock market prices or economics, among with a whole lot of other applications that we're going to talk about in the next lecture. How are we able to identify dimensions? This is called dimensionality reduction or non-redundancy removal. So we can do that. How are you able to identify the odd one out? That is called anomaly detection. Some people also call it out of distribution detection. So that's another name for it. Learning to write and to drive using reward signals is called reinforcement learning. And all of these different problems fall under data mining or machine learning, in which we are trying to learn from data to generalize to unseen cases. Okay, moving on, I'm going to give some definitions. Some of them are going to be quite informal, and I want to keep them as such. Uh, let's start with the first one. How would you fill in this blank? Computers they're fast, first of all. They are, well, some of them are quite expensive, but that's irrelevant here. But what I would like to fill it with is computers are dumb. And the reason I say that, and I hope my computer doesn't trash on me when I say it, is, uh, is the fact that we need to program them and we need to tell them exactly what we want. Let's say if we want to do 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, then I need to write a program that takes in two numbers and prints out the summation of these. Now, the sort of examples that we looked at in which we had an apple like this one that we had never seen before, so that's an apple. Telling the computer that this is an apple, writing a program for that is going to be really hard. However, we want to do that. And the reason we want to do that is because if we are able to do that, we would be able to do so much more. We would be able to identify patterns automatically in data. Okay? But it's really hard to write programs. So computers don't have an inherent ability to generalize to unseen cases. However, enabling a machine to do what we just did, that is learning from data or acting intelligently, is called artificial intelligence. And if we use previous data, to solve these tasks, just like we did, I showed you a set of pictures painted by two different painters, and then asked the question, who painted a particular painting? That is called machine learning or learning from data. So if someone asks you in an interview, is there a difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence? You may want to pause the video at this point to answer that question. You may want to say that machine learning is concerned with learning from data, in which we have a set of examples and we want to use that data to make inference or predictions or generate understanding of that data to unseen cases. Whereas artificial intelligence, which encompasses machine learning, can have other techniques as part of it that don't learn from data, for example. There can be reasoning techniques that fall, if they don't use data and there are a set of rules, those would be classical artificial intelligence techniques. Similarly, if you want to mine for patterns in data, much like what we did in identifying the odd one out, or we mined a pattern in our heads about the characteristics of a painting that related to a particular painter, then what we are doing is called data mining, coincidentally the title of this module. And if you want to use specific types of machine learning models called neural networks, which are an abstraction of how our brains or neurons in our brain work, then that is called deep learning or neural modeling. So these are a set of very loose definitions. The one thing I want you to realize, and you may want to discuss that with me, is the common thing in machine learning is making a computer program to learn from existing data. Okay? Humans learn. Actually, this is an exercise in human learning, me teaching you. So if we can base, if we can enable a machine to learn from existing data, then we can we can do a whole lot more, just like humans have done. Humans are really good at pattern hunting. We identify patterns in our environment, and we do that in our everyday life. Okay, if a person gets late for 5 minutes 3 times in a row, we make a judgment about that person that they are gonna probably be late for our fourth meeting. Okay, that prediction may or may not be correct, but let me give you a more scientific example here. Newton, he also loved apples, right? And he asked himself a question: if this apple falls, does the moon also fall? And then he was able to derive three laws of Newtonian mechanics that we are all very familiar with. The first law being that things at rest tend to be at rest, and things in motion tend to be in motion. And the things accelerate when acted upon by a force, and the acceleration is proportional to the amount of force applied, and so on. Okay. And people, what they did is use these simple laws that Newton was able to develop to identify how how planets revolve around the sun, and they were able to make very good predictions of where a planet would be using these laws. So if you know what the current position is and how much gravity is acting on a particular planet, you should be able to predict where it would be, say, in 6 months from now. However, what people observed is that there is a difference in what Newtonian mechanics saw or generated the prediction for, uh, and where the planet actually was in case of the planet Mercury. So there was a difference in the predicted and the actual orbit of the planet Mercury, and these differences led Einstein to develop the theory of relativity that is about 100 years old now. And our ability to identify patterns in planetary motion and trying to fit theories on top of that is our ability to learn from data. And we can identify differences, or we can identify deviations in those predictions to get better theories, and make sense of the world around us and make sense of the universe. However, sometimes it gets really hard. So let me give you a specific example. If I show you, and you must have studied it in biology in high school as well, if we know that human bodies are made of cells, and each cell has a DNA, which looks something like a DNA string, like the one that you see on your screens right now. The DNA string in a single human cell is about 3 billion characters long. And if I ask you the following question, identify what part of the DNA of one person is the same as another part of the DNA of another person, you would be looking at these strings and trying to mash them up, and it's going to get really boring really fast. So it's going to be tedious, and the chances of making errors by a human is going to be much larger. And that's where computers come in. Computers are really good at matching things. We can write programs to match stuff, and they actually help. They are really fast in doing that. Where we are slow, we can get help from computers. Our limitations are when we get data that is high dimensional. So unless you are Stephen Hawking, who allegedly had an ability to think in about 10 or 11 dimensions, it's really hard for us to think beyond the 3 dimensions or the 4 dimensions that we live in, or we feel that we live in. If we want to be able to do more, And if you want to able to solve challenges like cancer or DNA analysis or sequence analysis, we would need help from computers. So to be able to write computer programs that learn from existing data, identify patterns in them, make predictions, and advance our understanding of the world, that is what we want to do through data mining, through machine learning, and through artificial intelligence. What you see on your screen is a very rough Venn diagram, and this is not to scale, of the differences between artificial intelligence, machine learning, data mining, data science, computational intelligence, abbreviated as CI in this particular diagram, and pattern recognition, which is abbreviated as PR. Now, what you can see is I've made a loose circle, this one that you can see, uh, for artificial intelligence. So it's a quite a broad term in which we want, in which the goal is to develop artificial intelligence, that is intelligence in machines. It encompasses everything we do in machine learning because it's essentially making an AI when following the very specific philosophy of learning from data. So if we are learning from data to make artificial intelligence, what we are doing is machine learning. If we want to do identify patterns in data to make sense of the data itself or to generate predictions, we are doing data mining. So machine learning and data mining have roughly the same objective. So they can be used quite interchangeably. There are certain things that fall in what is called data science that are not, in my opinion, a part of data mining or machine learning. For example, how do we store data in databases? How do we how do we process data efficiently using multiple computers? Maybe a part of data science, like technologies like Hadoop, for example, or technologies like SQL, for example, they would be part of data science, but not for data mining. Because in data mining, our objective is to explore or to make inferences about unseen cases. If you're working on very specific types of data like images, or if there are voice patterns, you can have specific, the field would be called pattern recognition. If you want to use inspiration from nature, like evolution, for example, some people here might have heard the name genetic algorithms. If you want to take inspiration from nature and to understand data or to make intelligence, then that field would be called computational intelligence. And as you can see, there's a significant overlap between machine learning and computational intelligence. And again, I would recommend that you don't get yourself caught up in the battle of the words. What is machine learning? What is AI? What is data science? These are overlapping terms. It's good to have a loose mental understanding of what these terms mean, but don't be tied too strongly to each one of them. Okay? The important thing is we want to make machines intelligent. We want to use data to make, to generalize to unseen cases. And that is what we'll be focusing on in this particular module. There are different areas of different knowledge areas that we will be using when we'll be making such machines or such algorithms. We'll be using statistics, we'll be using linear algebra, we'll be using some calculus and some optimization techniques. We wouldn't be using some high performance computing, but that is also very helpful when developing large scale data science or data mining algorithms. Of course, we'll be developing algorithms, so we'll be using algorithm theory, data structures, and programming. And then there are other techniques that we may talk about, like signal analysis or computer vision or image processing or natural language processing. So all of that is also going to be a part of this particular module. Before moving on to what different types of machine learning are, and that we are going to talk about in the rest of the module, or what type of algorithms are already know about what is supervised learning and what is unsupervised learning. So, for example, in the examples we did today, of classification, in which we asked who painted a particular picture after you were given certain examples of painter number one and painter number two, that would be called supervised learning because you were given some data that was labeled that these particular paintings were painted by a particular painter, and these set of paintings were in the top row were painted by another painter. So that is what is called supervised learning. And then we also did clustering, in which I didn't tell you how to cluster them, but just asked the question, identify the common types or what types of apples do you see in this picture. Okay, so that was unsupervised. Similarly, there are schemes that are, or machine learning algorithms or data mining algorithms that are semi-supervised. So some of the data may be labeled and some of the data may not be labeled. Okay, so in this particular module, we will be talking about all of these techniques, especially the first two. Then we'll be talking about discriminative and generative models. And believe me, by the end of this module, you would know what each of these terms mean, even if you don't know them right now. We would also be talking about in this module different types of algorithms. So we'll be talking about nearest neighbors, and we'll be talking about kernel machines like support vector machines. We'll be talking about deep learning models and neural networks. We'll be talking about ensemble techniques in which you can combine the output of different machine learning models. We wouldn't be covering as much as Bayesian networks or probabilistic or logic-based models in this particular module, but those are also very interesting type of algorithms used in data mining and in machine learning. So that's the overall view of what we'll be talking about. However, before we talk about those algorithms, try to understand the philosophy that I'm coming in with. Instead of focusing pure on theoretical constructs, this course is more applied in nature. So my goal, as I said earlier, is to enable students to be able to write programs that can solve novel data mining and machine learning problems. So what I would be taking, the approach that I would be taking would be a hybrid approach in which we would be doing some theory, some mathematical background, because that is essential or crucial to applying these algorithms. So we are not there yet in which you can just program out different types of algorithms without understanding how they work. So it's important to understand a bit of theory, but most of it would be applied. And we'll be making new algorithms and implementing them in Python. So it's going to be a very hands-on module. And for that, we have the lab session, which would be run by our awesome teaching support team. Their details are available on the course webpage, and I welcome you to take a look there. So as I said, the aim is to enable students, enable you guys to develop data mining solutions for real world problems and provide a strong or a sufficient base for the development of novel machine learning methods and data mining techniques. The course is roughly divided into two parts. The first part, we should focus on classical machine learning methods like principal component analysis, classification schemes, how to evaluate the performance of machine learning models, what type of machine learning problems are out there, how does dimensionality reduction work, what are ensemble methods, and so on. And in the later part of the course, we're going to talk about deep learning and neural networks. We will be talking about specific types of neural networks called convolutional neural networks and residual neural networks. We'll also talk about some advanced topics like autoencoders, sequence learning, attention, and generative modeling. So that is what's going to come in the rest of the module in terms of the algorithms. However, it's also important to have the rubric for evaluation in front of you when you are going through this module. There will be two assignments since the course is applied in nature. There will be two major assignments in this module, and the lab sessions would be geared towards helping you solve those assignments or do well in those assignments. So please try to make the best use of these lab sessions and try to get these assignments done. They are absolutely critical in fulfilling the learning objectives. Okay, the marking scheme is available on your screens, and then there is going to be a final examination in this particular module. Okay. At the end of today's lecture, I think I've given you a summary of what we are going to talk about in this module. And what is exactly data mining? It's identifying patterns in data to make predictions, to gain an understanding of the data. And I've used machine learning and data mining interchangeably because both of them are based on data. So in machine learning, our goal is to develop algorithms that learn from data. In data mining, our goal is along the same direction, almost exactly the same. We want to identify patterns in data to first identify, to make sense of the data, and then use machine learning to make predictions. Okay, so in summary, we want to make a machine proud of us or to make it intelligent. And that's where I would like to end today's lecture. In the next lecture, we are going to talk about some very specific applications or some cool applications of machine learning and artificial intelligence. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. If there are any questions, I would please consult the course webpage for details on how to get in touch and have a great time ahead. Take care. Bye.